So, hello everyone. It's been quite a long time since I've done one of these podcasts. And today I'm going to talk about a very old module for advanced Dungeons and Dragons called Dark Sun, which was first released in 1991. And back then, the campaign setting Dark Sun was released as a box set, which contained maps. It also contained the campaign setting, which was written like the journal of a person who had been wandering Aethys, the place or the planet of the Dark Sun where the campaign is set. Then it provided a rule set for character creation. It also showed which rules from the AD&D setting were going to be used, how they were going to be modified. It gave information about the classes available, the races available, what proficiencies could be used, should be used, how they were going to be modified. And it also made it quite clear that there are quite a lot of changes to the way magic works and the clerics work, and that everyone has psionic abilities. And the whole thing was rounded off with an adventure called A Little Knowledge, which was presented, according to the book that I've read, as a new type of presenting an adventure, because it was actually prefaced by a short story, which was kind of a segue into the adventure. And then each section of the adventure was printed on an A4 sheet, and for the players, each of these segments was accompanied by a themed picture, which the DM was then going to show to the players to set the scene and to basically illustrate the story as he was telling it. Now, what is Dark Sun? Dark Sun, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting D&D settings for various reasons, but mainly, I think, because it is very different. When we look at what was out at the time, we had Greyhawk, which was the original and invented by Gary Gygax's world. Then, of course, there was some Blackmore, but not for, I think, anything like after first edition, really. Because, of course, he and Arneson had the falling out. Then the two of them got together again, and then there was another falling out. And then, of course, there was the Ravenloft complex. And then, I don't know if Spelljammer had already been out at the time, but that was, again, quite an odd one, because that's basically about space travel in a way. And there is some space travel in Greyhawk as well, because people crash their spaceships and then weird things happen. But most of these, or all of them, were kind of medieval. I mean, there was medieval horror in Ravenloft, there was medieval in Faerun in the Sword Coast, of course, then we have medieval in Greyhawk, and of course Blackmore was also medieval. But it was all about, people being heroes or becoming heroes. There was a lot of chivalry. There were different classes like the paladin, etc., the knights, and so on and so forth. Damsels in distress, going into the dungeon, slaying the dragon, getting its treasure, that kind of thing. And then along came Dark Sun. And Dark Sun is set in a dystopian world named Aethys, which has almost completely dried up. The main part of the land where the beginning stories are set, the tablelands, the Tyr region, or Tyre, depending on how you want to pronounce it, I would call it the Tyr region, is a dried wasteland. It is inhospitable. The sun has turned crimson, or it's a crimson sun. Later on, there is a second version of the setting that was released, so kind of like a revised edition, where a lot of backstory is added. But as it comes out of the box, it is very rough. You only know there is a crimson sun. It beats down and it kills everything. So basically, during the day, we have temperatures of well above 40 degrees centigrade, possibly 50 degrees centigrade. Water is a commodity that's very rare in most of the lands. You are basically always going to suffer from the land itself. Sun, sandstorms, wind, and at night temperatures drop dramatically. So if you don't have shelter at night, you might well, freeze to death if you keep going and if you keep this up. So shelter is important. During the day, you need shelter from the sun. During the night, you need shelter from the cold. You need a way to carry enough water to make sure that you can actually get to where you want to go. So you have to get the water first, then you have to carry it. This will mean that you will be a lot slower than you might normally be because you're weighed down literally by the water that you have to carry. So the travel time is extended, so you have to bring even more water. So you see where we're going with this. A lot of things have to do with resource planning. So in a way, this game has a lot of simulation going for it. So how much water do we need? It's very clear how much water you need. It's very much clear how much water you need if you walk during the day or if you walk at night, how much time you can spend in the shade. Exhaustion plays a role. Then, of course, if you're lucky enough and if you're rich enough, you can afford maybe an animal that can carry the stuff for you. But of course, the animal needs water as well. For those of us who like this kind of resource planning, this is probably a really nice change of scenery. Having said this, for those people who have never played AD&D, things like resource planning, things like how much can I walk with whatever I'm carrying and so on and so forth, is something that has always been there. So this is nothing that's only specific to Dark Sun, but there, of course, it is increased by an order of magnitude because of the inhospitability of the landscape, and also because there aren't that many people, there aren't that many places where you can go and just say, oh yeah, we're going to just go to the nearest town and stay at an inn, because there are no towns. There are different types of settlements. Some of them are cities. They are ruled by so-called sorcerer kings. I'm going to go into what they are or who they are in a bit. Then there are outposts of trading houses, merchant houses that basically run all of the trade. They don't have citizenship in any of the cities, but they have posts there. They run emporiums, but they also have outposts strewn across the land. Then you've got hermits that live somewhere in the middle of nowhere. You've got hunter-gatherer tribes. You've got ex-slaves. I'm going to go into the details of slavery because that's very important in the setting. You've got marauding bands that basically just have, like hit and run tactics. They just wait for a caravan, they just kill everybody, take their stuff, run away again. Then you've got herders and hunters and gatherers. And then you have the giants that live on islands in the silted sea or in the Sea of Silt, and basically just every so often decide, oh yeah, we need some food, so we raid a place, we smash it up. But when you just go to their islands and you wait far away from the island, far enough away that you're not a threat, and you just hail them, chances are that they will actually invite you to sit with them and share some food and some drink, because actually they're quite likable, except when they decide to go on a rampage and kill everyone, and just basically then even they're very single-minded. So if a giant decides to exterminate, a tribe of elves somewhere because they want to take their stuff, and you happen to cross their paths, they will probably just walk around you because you're not their target. So that's quite interesting. And then you have the big cities, which are run by sorcerer kings, some of whom are very, very old. They all have magic ability. Now, here we come to a very interesting part of Dark Sun mechanically, and that is, and also, setting specific, there is no magic in the sense that it exists in Faerun, for example, or Greyhawk, in terms of when you learn magic in those settings. It's Vancian magic, so you basically have spell slots, and once you have used a spell slot, you forget the spell, that was slotted in there, which I always find really weird. But that's the way Vancian magic works. And essentially, when you use magic in Aethys, you start destroying the environment, because you take the life force that is in the land and you convert this into magical energy. And there are two types of magicians, the Defilers and the Preservers. The Defilers simply don't care. They can advance really quickly. They are really evil. Everybody hates them. And basically they have a scorched earth policy. They cast and everything around them loses all its life force and turns into literal ash. And this ash has no nutrients. And if you gather this ash, you would have to wait for a year before this ash can be used to grow anything again. But the problem is that when the ash is just blown away by the wind, where it falls, then you just have barren earth below it, the ground, and that won't carry any fruit for decades. So Defilers are very powerful because they can cast really powerful spells, and in game terms they can advance a lot more quickly than the Preservers, but they literally turn this wasteland into an even worse wasteland. The Preservers, however, can cast spells and take magic from the earth, so take the essence, but without destroying it. So they are kind of the good guys. Then you've got the Druids that basically preserve the world, try to keep it safe. And if you cross them, and if you try to destroy the planet further, they will actually take you out. They are very powerful, and they are very aggressive and very protective of wherever they are and whichever place they have chosen as their home. Then we have the Clerics. The Clerics have a big problem because there are no gods. Aethys has no gods. So instead, the Clerics worship one of the elements. So you've got earth clerics, water clerics, and that kind of thing. And they draw their power for their spells, not from the land by destroying it and taking out its essence, but by worshipping the elements. If you say, okay, that's kind of weird. I mean, if I'm an earth elemental cleric, why don't I take energy from the land? But if I'm a defiler, I do. Or if I'm a preserver, even I do. I understand this because I find it a bit strange as well. And I would actually have said, if there is a land where there are no gods, then you can't have clerics. Simple as. There is no clerical magic then. Then we have the Templars, who essentially work for the Sorcerer Kings and who are a little bit like clerics in that they don't have any magical power in themselves. They don't take the magic from the essence of the world. Instead, they serve their Sorcerer King or Queen, and they somehow have power. In the first edition of the game setting, it's not explained where they draw their power from. They just have it, and they can bestow spells to their Templar followers. So they're kind of like priests in a way of those Sorcerer Kings and Queens. The Sorcerer Kings and Queens are not very well described in the game setting per se in the first edition. In the second edition, there will be a lot of backstory, and I believe that a lot of this backstory is also revealed during a story arc that was published as a setting module series, which is really, really interesting, and it's very intriguing, the storyline that unfolds. But you simply have to accept that they are there. But of course, it means that you as the DM, if you just have this box, you can just go, well, I'll just build my own story. And there is plenty of things that you could do. And then, of course, there is the, in my opinion, interestingly enough, very controversial story of psionics, because I wasn't even aware that psionics is an issue that's hotly debated in D&D. So psionics is a form of magic, but it doesn't come from the outside. The psionicist takes their power from within themselves. And mechanically, they have a number of points that they can use in order to cast a spell. Now, apparently, when this was first floated way back when in the day, people were in uproar. Because apparently the word psionics kind of has this, for English speakers, not for me, this touch of the supernatural on the one hand, but also the touch of the sci-fi to it. Because apparently they liken it to Dune. We've got the Bene Gesserit, and they are apparently psionicists. I don't even know if it's ever mentioned. I have read Dune, but I can't recall if they actually call it psionics. Could be. And of course people were like, leave your sci-fi out of my medieval Dungeons and Dragons, which is a fair point, because like I said, crashing spaceships in Greyhawk, and then the Temple of the Frog, or Frog God, or whatever it's called, I don't care about these things. I understand why people didn't want to mix it. However, when you have played other RPGs where there is magic, this idea of having magic inside you for whatever reason, if it's the power of mind, or you're very good at meditating, or God knows what, and you have a number of points that you basically use to and can expend in order to cast spells, isn't a really weird idea. It's not called psionics, but you know, for example, in Das Schwarze Auge, the Dark Eye, it's simply called astral points. So some form of astral energy, God knows where it comes from, or the gods know, I don't know, but you just have a store of points that you can use, and you can cast whichever spell you want, as long as you have enough points to expend on it. You just, cast it, and then the points are taken away, and you can recuperate them after a while. So psionics is important in this game, and every person on Aethys, every thinking creature, has at least one psionic spell. It's called Wild Talent. There are tables that you can roll on. And in order to play Dark Sun, you actually need the Psionics Handbook, because otherwise you can't. And basically, everyone has a latent psionic talent. So each player gets one at the beginning. And all of the NPCs also have at least one psionic talent. Which brings us to the question of, okay, so now I know a little bit about the world. What kind of races are there? Well, you have elves, you have halflings, you have humans, you have three-creen or tri-creen, depending on how you want to pronounce it. You have, and these are the playable ones. You've got dwarves, you've got mules, and you've got half-giants. And some of them don't exist in normal D&D, and some do, but they are quite different, two very, very different. First of all, let's take humans, which are the most common race, and in all D&D universes, or in everywhere in the D&D multiverse, and they are like they are in other settings. They have unlimited advancement in all of the classes, as is normal in AD&D, but even they have lived through a very long time of terrible abuse by the land, through the land, so even they have started to mutate. Now those mutations are usually not very strong, so they might have a little bit, like sweat back ears, or some of them have webbed feet. They may be a little taller, they may be a little more emaciated, they may look different, they may have some form of facial or body change, but none of them are significant enough to change how they operate in game terms. So it's more like cosmetics. Then we've got the dwarves. They are pretty much like dwarves. I couldn't really see that much of a difference. Then we've got the elves. Now the elves are very different in that they are actually thieves. I mean, they are the ones they are fencers. They deal in stolen goods. They are also very, very much part of their own tribe, and everybody else they consider strange. They don't want to be with them, but if they decide or have to interact with them, or even like join a group with them, in order to know if they can really trust you, what they will do is they will put you to tests, and those tests go on forever. So the first one may be that they just put out a very valuable object and then check, is it still there the next day, or did you steal it? But those tests can become so difficult and so horrendous that they may actually endanger your life, which of course is terrible. Just imagine, no, it's totally safe. Just go into that mine that I just found. There's a lot of water. You go in and you're met by 5 giant spiders. You fight your way back and you kind of go, what the hell was that? And they say, well, I just wanted to see if I could trust you. Still love me? I mean, that's very sociopathic. And then we've got the halflings, which are so different from the halflings that you know from other areas in the multiverse, because they are actually cannibals. They consider every other race, and here we're talking about the sentient races, or whatever you want to call them, a great and happy meal. Except they don't eat each other, but they eat humans, they eat elves, they eat half-giants, giants, moles, dwarves, tricrine, whatever they can get. And sometimes even raw. They are very different. They also are not really able to speak common. So most other races have a common tongue in common that they can use when they converse with each other, but the halflings don't. So it says, if you go and visit them, first of all, be careful, because they will probably try and eat you. But if you manage to not get eaten, and if you want to talk to them, you need an interpreter, because they don't speak common. They also don't do well in captivity, but they do sometimes get enslaved. But then it's more like, if you want to keep a halfling, you have to make them believe that they are actually, working for you. And they will take some form of payment, but not very much. And other than that, they are actually quite interested in self-betterment. They are quite spiritual as well. They live within the land. They also live in a part of Aethys, which is on top and beyond of the encircling mountains, which is very green. They live in a verdant jungle, which has its very own problems because it's very dangerous. And for non-halflings, the biggest danger is actually running into a halfling and then getting eaten. So going there is actually quite dangerous, because the halfling tribes are cannibals, and as I said, and they are wild people. They have a very interesting civilization amongst themselves. So they have different tribes with different kings, but they always work together. And there is a close-knit society there that basically just consists of different tribes, but they will also always aid each other. They will always work together. One king will drop everything to save the tribe of another, So for them, this is like their own race. That is, in a way, they are racist. In a way, so basically, if you're not them, then you're, first of all, an interesting meal, and also they don't care about anyone else. Then we've got the tricrine, which are a race of, they look like giant praying mantises. They don't need to sleep, which is very good. They are very, very good warriors, but they have a hive mind, and they basically live amongst each other. And if they happen to have to live amongst non-tricrine, they, will learn that they are their clutch. so they're clutch mates, so basically they will form a little tribe with them. Then they will start and try to fight their way to the top until they are stopped, and then they stop fighting, and then they will just submit to whoever is stronger and bests them in a fight. So, and then they are very, very loyal. And they also can't help it. If there is a fight, they will just put themselves in harm's way to save their clutch mates. And then we have the mole. The mole are a crossbreed between dwarves and humans. It's forced breeding, so we will just let that hang there and not think too much about it. And they are sterile. They cannot procreate. They have the best of both races. Sturdiness, strength, stubbornness of the dwarf, the energy, the ability to keep going, and their human part gives them the size. They are a lot taller, and also a lot of human traits. They don't have any body hair whatsoever, and they are specifically bred for slavery. They usually work as gladiators. So gladiator games are spectator sport. Gladiators can become very famous. So as you can see, there is a decadence in the society. In the upper echelons, they go and watch other people slaughter each other in arenas. They are way too expensive to breed in order to send them to the fields or send them to the mines. So they are really gladiators, and if they for some reason cannot go on as gladiators and have survived, then they're just like every other slave, put to use until they drop dead. Which brings us to the half giants. The half giants are the result of an experiment where someone crossbred giants and humans. And they are very tall, talking about 5 meters. They are also very big. They don't have a culture. And so, in order to make up for this, actually thinking about it, they kind of remind me a little bit, very, very remotely, of the androids in Blade Runner, who also don't have any culture. They don't have any memories. They're kind of like they are brought into use, as it were, and then they kind of like start to copy humans who they look like, and then start making their own culture and adapting to what they see. So the half giants, since they don't have a culture of their own, actually try to become like the people they are around, and they are very soft spoken. They are very gentle. But they're also used as fighters and gladiators. But when they're not fighting, they are just very gentle and very pleasant. And they try to please, and they want to be reassured. They want to feel that they are wanted. When you read the description of what they look like, and then you read what they are like and how you should role play them, they are a very interesting species, and very, very, very heartbreaking in a way. I found them more heartbreaking than the moles, who were, of course, bred for exactly that, for being slaves. But this brings me to the question of slavery. So slavery is very important. Aethys consists of a slave-holding class, which is basically everywhere. I think every single city-state has slaves, owns slaves. The slaves sow, they harvest, they are sent to the mines. Some slaves are also enslaved to fight. There are many armies. Each city-state has a standing army. They go to war with each other. They try to fend off raiders, etc. They try to ensure that nobody takes their crops, because hunger and starvation are quite common occurrences. And every single sorcerer, king and queen, knows that if they cannot feed the people in their cities, they will suffer open revolt. So when there is a hunger crisis, a starvation crisis looming, they will do everything in their power to prevent it. and then everyone gets fed. Women, children, slaves, everyone. The slaves less so than the nobles, but still. And there's also the nobility. They're of course not slaves. They are slave keepers in most cases. They're also not Templars. And they kind of have to work with the Sorcerer King, but not necessarily happily do so. And there is sometimes open opposition. There are sometimes infighting, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of intrigue going on as well. But at the end of the day, considering that they are very magical for whatever reason, so far, at the time when the adventure starts with the beginning of the campaign setting, the Sorcerer Kings are still in power. And of course, I'm saying still, because of course, if you have a society that is so fraught with tension, with hunger, with natural catastrophes, with revolt always bubbling and kind of like boiling in a cauldron, but somebody's put the lid on, it might just as well just boil over, and then you could do a lot of things as your DM. You could have like a small thing happening, you have a group of people who live in a city who try to make ends meet. You could have slaves that are trying to free themselves. You could have ex-slaves that are on the run. You could have people, like of the nobility even, or of the merchant houses that basically are everywhere and nowhere. They are citizens of nowhere, to quote Theresa May. And they could run an intrigue, or there could be something happening that one of the Sorcerer Kings is losing their power. So who's going to move into that vacuum? Or that they want more power, that they're going to declare war. So you could have all kinds of adventures in this setting. The setting out of the box is a complete sandbox. The description, like I said, is really nicely done. It's the Wanderer's Journal, where he talks about, it's not clear if it's a man or a woman, so they talk about how they have traveled the lengths and breadths of the tablelands and some of the surrounding environs. It's all about as well fauna and flora and habits of people, what kind of people are there, how do they live, blah blah blah. And then of course you have the rule set, which basically takes you through character creation. Since it's very deadly actually, and AD&D was very deadly, you start your character at level 3, and they also recommend that you use the character tree so that everyone creates at the very beginning 4 different characters that can be very different, also different races, different classes, so that as you maybe progress your campaign and you move from a kind of like an exploratory, let's face the desert, to a more intrigue-based storyline, you can bring in the intrigue-working Templar. But then next week you're gonna have the rugged mole that's gonna help his group or her group through the desert, things like that, which I find interesting. I've never worked with this concept. As a player, I would find it a bit difficult to get used to, but I think you can get used to it. But that's one option that they have. They also say that they basically say the I don't know off the top of my head what's the rule, what the name of the rule is, but instead of when you drop to 0 hit points, you die, you drop to -10. So basically, if you just drop to 0 and nothing happens, but if you, let's say, have 5 hit points and somebody hits you for 15, then you're dead because you have reached -10. But if you just drop to -1, you still live and somebody can stabilize you and bandage you. But of course, during that time, they can't fight. So it's a little bit like 5e, except you don't get any death saving throws. Of course, all of the things that you find in AD&D still apply. You have level limits for different races. So only humans can reach any level in any class. But of course, you've got multi-classing as well that is possible. And generally speaking, it's, if you know how AD&D works, I think you will be able to play Dark Sun, no problem. There is no 5th edition version, and I don't think there ever will be, because obviously it is a dystopian world, and it is definitely not something that is sellable to a mass market. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is the game that wants to apply to a mass market, and that's fair. I don't deny that they have a point, because role-playing is a niche market, and within this niche they are certainly the biggest player in the room, but they're also not without competition. And of course, topics like slavery, etc., are hot topics, and that's understandable. But then again, they were hot topics back then. In 1991, slavery was already something, and had been for a long time, that people didn't consider okay. But of course, today times have changed, and I think that there will never be a time again when a dystopian box set like this, or a dystopian setting like this, will ever be published again. However, while Wizards is not going to publish this anymore, you can get it on Drive-Thru RPG, and there you can get the whole box set. You can get plenty of Dark Sun material there, as PDFs of course, but also as print on demand. And the pictures that I've been showing are actually from this particular version. I got the hardcover book, and it's brilliant. So instead of getting a box, obviously, or getting separate publications, they've all put it into one book, which is a bit problematic, because then you can't make use of the flip book where you show people the adventure pictures. But then again, when you buy the book, you also get the PDF. You can use this, print off the pictures that you want, or even put them into Roll20. But the quality is extremely good, as is always the case with Drive-Thru RPG or DM's Guild. I've bought so many books off of them, especially for the Dark Sun area, and I have never had any complaints. The only thing that is a little bit of a downer is that in the actual print version, they cut up the maps. So the original maps were huge, and of course, instead of just bringing them, kind of like making them smaller, they just basically printed them off on A4 or whatever it is, letter, whatever the size is. So now you've got like 8 or 10 of those map segments, and well, you would have to print them off and maybe glue them together, which is something that I did last year just for fun, because I was bored. But I would actually just put them into Roll20. I would just export them to JPEG and then just put them into Roll20 so that you can show them to your players as well. Another thing that they also do is, in the game setting, they set up the fact that there used to be other civilizations before, because you can find ruins, and they describe them a little bit. They also give names to some of them, but it's pretty much sandbox. It's up to you, the DM, who built those ruins, why they built them, how long ago they built them, and so on and so forth. So, what is my verdict after all of this? Well, Dark Sun is, in my opinion, one of the most intriguing and uniquely written systems or settings for any role-playing game, because it is so different. And I remember, I have fond memories of it, not because I played it, because I didn't, but I remember it came out in 1991. So during that time, I remember going into one of the shopping malls in Munich. It was probably Galeria Kaufhof or Karstadt, one or the other. And I went to basically the book section or the game section, and I was looking for something, but not AD&D. And I remember seeing this famous picture that's also on the cover of these guys, and I'm showing it now, and they're looking at you, and it is this ferocity, but also this primal instinct that comes through from the guy on the left. He's holding his 2 hammers, which are made of bone, because there is no metal, or hardly any, on Aethys. Every so often you can find old metal stuff, weapons, armor in those ruins, and there is at least one mine, I think it's in Uric, or is it I don't know, I can't remember, where they actually mine for ore, but it's so rare. So this guy with his bone picks, and he is roaring, and then there are the other guys that are looking straight at you, and behind them sets this dark sun and puts everything into this dusk light. And it's really, I remember this picture because at the time it was just so different. It just looked so different. This wasn't medieval castle, damsel in distress, blah, blah, blah. And interestingly enough, there is supposedly a dragon in the Tablelands. And it is simply called the Dragon. There seems to be just the one. But I mean, even that lends itself to having hundreds of stories told by a DM and their group. So I really, really hope that I will get to play this, and I actually want to play it at least once using the AD&D rules. There are conversions to 5th edition, and it was also re-released for 4th edition. Now the problem with 4th edition is, of course, nobody's playing it these days, or not so many people. Also, there was very little material released. There are some things, I think there's one in Polyhedron, one, I think in 2004 there was an issue dedicated to Dark Sun, then there are some in Dragon or maybe Dungeon, I don't know. So there are some articles as well. There is so much material on Drive-Thru RPG. And there are also private groups that support Dark Sun, Aethys, and conversions thereof as well. For the 5th edition, they've also gone to great lengths to make sure that you can play it by providing a link to it's a Psionics handbook that they have cooked up, because there is no rules for Psionics in 5th edition. And so it is totally playable if you are interested in this. But I would also say it's probably one of the ones where you need to discuss upfront with your players what themes they are happy to play in, like slavery is a problem. And for myself, I would also say I would not want anyone to play an elf, a tricreen, or a halfling, because I find it really difficult to run a game where you have a party member who, in theory, may just one night decide, oh, I'm going to have a snack. Ooh, that human looks tasty. I don't want to not have those races in the game, but I'm not sure about having them in the group. And with such exotic races as the tricreen, which are essentially insects. Doing this from a role-playing perspective, I don't see how this adds anything. You know, most people find it difficult to play a normal elf because it's usually just humans that really love trees. So something that alien is going to be very, very tough from a role-playing perspective. And the elves, I mean, you know, there you would have to have a very responsible player, and everyone in the group needs to be aware that they will be put to the test. And I would also put a stop to this if this gets out of hand, because, you know, like making people go literally run a gauntlet just so that one guy says, oh, I really need to know if I can trust you, still love me. That's I find that quite destructive. It can be fun, or if this is the way your group runs, or if you just want to say, well, we're going to play a band of tricreen, or a band of elves, or a band of halflings, absolutely no problem. But to mix them in, I would find difficult for me as a DM. So that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I wish you all a pleasant rest of the day. Bye.